Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this video where I'm going to provide you with a bit of an overview of the IMF Digital Infrastructure Costing Estimator. So what's the motivation for this model that we've produced? Well, really, within the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we know that we both want to provide universal, affordable broadband, but also that just providing those services can also enable us to hit many of the other SDG targets. Okay, so generally, it's a good thing for people to have access to these services. They can improve their own economic opportunities and also productivity benefits. They're able to better engage not just with other people, but also with businesses and governments. So generally, we see this as being a merit good. How do we define digital infrastructure? Well, actually, within this, what we're really talking about are both the physical electronic networking equipment aspects, as well as the kind of civil engineering non-electronic aspects as well. So these are assets, essentially, that need to be kind of operated in a coordinated way in order to provide digital content, applications, and services to end users. Okay, and we've got an example here just demonstrating that we might have fiber optic cable operating over international links, and then there's a variety of local access technologies that can be used to provide those services to people. So it could be Wi-Fi based, it could be cellular based, it could be via a fixed connection, it could utilize a satellite connection. There are many different ways that people might actually connect to the internet. Now, this work that's been going on is part of a much wider analytical agenda at the IMF within this kind of this GovTech research stream. And I'm not going to talk about those other aspects here, but I just wanted to point to the fact that this is one part of a much larger jigsaw puzzle, which is really trying to get a grasp on some of these changes that are taking place within this area. We know that digital connectivity is essential. It's one of those key infrastructures that everyone needs access to, particularly in the 21st century. And this is a fairly well-trodden path. We have had general-purpose technologies in the past, which we have all accessed and utilized. So, for example, in the 19th century, railroads might have been the key general-purpose technology. In the middle of the 20th century, we saw this with individual mobile transportation, motor cars, and then very much from the 1990s onwards, we saw the internet infrastructure developing as a global connectivity platform that enabled people and companies, governments to interact remotely. So it's essential that people have access to these services, but ultimately the infrastructure that already exists is highly heterogeneous. We know in economic terms that it's a rigid, fixed, durable asset, and it's not available everywhere, at least not in high quality terms. And this this map here really kind of just gives us a bit of insight into that. So, for example, this is actually taken from Del Portillo's paper, and it's utilizing open cell ID data, and it's essentially identifying those areas which have 4G telecommunications. So, for example, 4G here is in yellow, 3G which is in blue, 2G which is in red, and then essentially any area on land that is black is highly likely to have poor connectivity in this instance. And obviously there's many of those, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, also in Asia as well, and parts of Latin America, even northern Canada, for example. So for example, we need to try to plug these gaps. We need to build more infrastructure, and that's kind of the core driving aim of DICE. How do we connect people? So the digital divide exists, and the divide in access is quite substantial, and there are large disparities across regions. So I mentioned before sub-Saharan Africa. In our data here from the ITU, it's got some of the lowest levels of users of internet access currently, but then there are other areas too that are also lagging in that list. And then we know that there are kind of key factors that affect the digital divide and the adoption of these technologies. Okay, so there's a key aspect here on the right-hand side, identifying the disparity in gender, in actually accessing the internet, and that's particularly stark in low-income developing countries here, a much larger disparity. And that's often in both their handset ownership, but then also in accessing those services. So there are actually lots of different types of technology that we can use to connect to the internet. So we could use Wi-Fi, as many of us are on a daily basis. We could use a fixed connection, but we could also use mobile cellular communications. Okay, and these usually come in different generations. So the highly successful ones traditionally have been 2G, for example, which actually delivered SMS and voice to a massive number of consumers, and then 4G, which basically delivered mobile broadband, and its delivery was kind of auspicious because it also occurred around the same time that the Apple iPhone was launched, and that people had access to smartphones. And this really kind of changed the landscape for how people access the internet. So 2G and 4G have been highly successful. 3G introduced basic data access, but it wasn't really as successful as some of the other generations. And 5G is much higher speed generation of mobile broadband, so it delivers the enhanced mobile broadband use case. But the reality is that that's not really going to be the key kind of enabler of universal mobile broadband over the next 8 or 10 years, up to 2030, and therefore we're not addressing it within this particular study. We're focusing within the DICE model mainly on 4G as a way to connect people, and then in very hard to reach areas, satellite connectivity will be the main kind of technology of last resort. Okay, well, thank you very much for tuning into this video, which has given you a little bit about the motivation of the DICE model, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video where we're going to get a little bit into the technical detail affiliated with how the model